All right, welcome to part 5 of the Backyard Incident series. And this video I call Just Golden in what it reveals. Okay, so if you look at page 14 of the Transportation Safety Board report pertaining to the Backyard incident of 2007, and again, the reason that I went back to the Backyard incident of 2007 is because it was discussed in a footnote, not the report itself, but what came out of the Backyard incident of 2007 was the first attempt to totally overhaul frontline rail worker training programs. And in my opinion, that was a total public scam, very much as was the report into the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, and very much as you will see in this report as we keep moving through it in what it reveals as far as the Transportation Safety Board not taking a side. They're supposed to be impartial and just give you the facts. So let's keep going with the Backyard incident of 2007 and what it reveals. And again, this was at a time when Keith Creel was the Chief Operations Officer for CN Rail. Keith Creel is now the CEO of CPKC. It's also very much, this report also very much reveals issues that were happening in Backyard and at CN Rail in general in the 2005-2006 timeframe when John Orr was Assistant General Manager, and then he became General Manager of Backyard in 2006. He left Backyard in 2007. I don't know if that was before or after the Backyard incident that he would go to Edmonton. I haven't found the exact date as to when John Orr left Backyard, but John Orr is the current Chief Operations Officer at Norfolk Southern. So again, an impact, as far as issues that U.S. rail workers and U.S. rail investors certainly need to be aware of. And as you go through more and more of these reports and these issues, I got to tell you, as an MA in finance, if I knew as an investor in rail everything that I now know about the then and the now, I got to tell you, there's no way that I would personally be investing in the rail industry. That's my humble opinion. But anyway, you'll be free to form your own after you go through all of these videos, all these materials. So let's keep going here. If we look here on page 14 of the Transportation Safety Board report pertaining to the Backyard incident of 2007, you can see that it says the qualifying test for the conductor who was involved in the Backyard incident. The helper qualified as a conductor on the 14th of August 2007. It says after completing 34 training trips. No, that's the deception that we saw in previous videos, because he really only had 22 of the 45 required training trips. They included his observation trips in the qualifying trips. You're not supposed to do that. Observation trips are trips where the conductor trainee is just observing. He's not doing anything. And so those are a separate part of the training program. As you can see here in the table that I have, page 11 of this same report, if you look at weeks 3 and 4, you could see that those were the observation trips. But we saw in a previous video how CN had decided to change things a little bit and include observation trips in the trial trips, which are supposed to occur in weeks 10 to 14 and potentially up to week 16. But it says there, minimum of 45 trial trips. Those are not supposed to include observation trips. But in this case, they absolutely did, and it seems that it was in more than just this case when you read through more and more of this report. And so, again, you have to ask yourself, was John Orr part of these changes to the training programs for qualifying conductors was some of this his operational excellence, even though he left in 2007, were all these changes to training programs for frontline rail workers potentially happening even under John Orr when he was at Mackyard in 2005 and 2006. I have no way of knowing that because this incident happened in 2007. But anyways, so the deception goes on in the Railway Investigation Report by the Transportation Safety Board. This should have said after completing 22 training trips, because you're not supposed to include the observation trips. And given he had only 22 actual training trips, because he included the observation trips, that means this person had less than 50% of the required minimum field training trips. And based on the union contract, which may stipulate 60 to work in Mackyard, he may have had as little as 37% of the required training. I have to pull out that contract for Mackyard, but I'm pretty sure in the past I had read that that yard needed 60 trips to be a qualified conductor working in that yard. And that would make sense because, again, Mackyard is huge. It has over 200 tracks and over, several hundred switches. So that would make sense that you would need more than just, the required 45 minimum trips for less large areas or yards. Anyway, this conductor had a qualifying test of only 2 hours, and it was during a day shift. Now, if you look at the test here, where you see I underline required to explain, required to describe, required to describe, required to, the last one, required to use appropriate speeds. But you know what? A field test for a conductor is not supposed to be an oral exam. It's supposed to be a test where you show that you have the required skills to actually do the job. And so if I'm required to explain how to pull cars out of a bowl, that would be a belt pack movement. But he was only required to explain? Doesn't sound like a lot of practical experience there that he had to show. So required to explain how to pull cars out of a bowl and assemble a train, given a switch list with 9 blocks. Okay, so I'm just required to explain. Okay, doesn't sound like a very good test. Next part, required to couple in a track using proper methods to couple equipment and using radio and throwing switches. Okay, that sounds like that was actual practical. Let me see you put the train together, couple the air hoses, whatever. Very basic knowledge he should have. Required to move locomotives with no cars from one lead track to another while other movements were working in the area. Okay, required to move locomotives with no cars. I'm going to assume here that this means a belt pack movement with a remote control unit that he would have been moving, because a qualifying conductor would not be moving locomotives unless it was a belt pack movement. So from one lead track to another while yard movements were working in the area. Okay, so that seems to me like you're actually using the belt pack there. But it was just moving the locomotive. There were no cars attached to the unit. And so how much of an indication or a feel are you getting for what it's really like to move cars using a belt pack in this massive rail yard? You're really not having the impact of tonnage or weight or length of the movement impacting here. You're just moving the locomotive. So not an exactly difficult task or a task that would really show experience as far as one's skill level when it comes to belt pack. Then the next one, required to describe the concept of knowing where other crews were in relation to himself and what they were doing. Okay, so while you're doing belt pack operations, you would have to know where other crews are in the yard. Well, how difficult is that, and um, how much of a real life scenario is that? Because belt pack is usually done in another section of the yard, not where, trains are coming in and out. They have specific areas assigned for putting trains together and whatever. So, do I need to know about all the other crews in the area? You'd need to know probably about the ones on adjacent tracks if there were others there. But knowing where other crews were in relation to himself and what they were doing, do you really need to know what they are doing? If they're putting together trains, do you need to know what they are doing if it doesn't impact the tracks you're working on? Probably not. But anyway, so required to describe, again, just, to me, this is report filler. And you're going to see that also when we discuss managers at the controls in another series that I need to do. There's a lot of report fillers that, does this really tell me anything? But anyway, okay, so I'm required to describe the knowledge, the concept of knowing where other crews are and what they're doing. Then required to describe, again, required to describe an oral in detail methods of pulling cars from the dual control hump and the permissions required. Okay, well, this again would be belt pack operations. Why was he not required to do it? Just like in the first point here, why was he not required to do it? Why was he not required to do all of these things? Why so many oral questions to a field exam when you're supposed to be getting tested on showing that you know how to do the job? So then, required to fully describe the meaning of point protection zones and the meaning of the various signals displayed by point protection zones lights. Again, why are you being asked to describe it? Why are you not being asked to actually engage in point protection zone operations? But what we're told here at the bottom again is required to use appropriate speeds while pulling equipment and making joints. As we go through a little further in this report, what is actually shown here as what he was actually told to do, I have serious questions as to whether or not some of this even happened based on other information in this report. But anyways, it does say required to use appropriate speeds while pulling equipment, that would be with a belt pack, and making joints. Now, here's the thing. If you put that point together with bullet point 3, required to move a locomotive, but with no cars from one lead track to another, why would that not have been combined? Those two. Why would those two not have been combined? Required to have appropriate speeds when pulling equipment. Did this guy actually do this, is what I'm basically saying. I don't know. I have my doubts. They're saying this is what he did, but let's look at what other things are in this document further on in making joints. Then here's a really interesting point. A train master provided point protection and monitored radio transmissions at all times through the testing process. Okay, well, that's really interesting. A train master is a management employee. But if you look at week 16 in the table here, which has the, on page 11 of this same report, the test was supposed to be administered by the conductor who had provided the training. So why wouldn't the conductor have been providing the point protection zone or whatever? I guess, why was the manager involved? Was there an actual conductor performing this test, or was the test completely done by a management employee? And if done by a management employee, well, he did participate, this train master. Why did the train master not first confirm that this employee had the required minimum training prior to engaging in a qualification test for this conductor, when he was clearly not qualified, not even close to having the training required to work in Mackyard as a qualified conductor? So, was there a conductor, a supervising conductor, even involved in this test? Or was management maybe qualifying conductor trainees on its own without proper training actually happening? And so other conductors would be oblivious to the fact that maybe this guy was being qualified, fake qualified. So that's the issue. Why did the train master not confirm this person even had the proper training to be qualified? There was obviously no review of his file prior to this train master participating in this qualification test, because if he would have reviewed the file, he certainly would have seen that this person did not have the minimum required training to be qualified. And I would say again, was there an actual conductor participating in this test? It doesn't really tell us that there was. So do we assume that there is? I don't know. Anyways, but the other issue I want you to look at here is the fact that, again, it says he had 34 training trips. No, 34 minus the, let's say, 12 observation trips, if he had 6 per week for 2 weeks. That would only be 22 actual field trips, or less than 50% of the minimum required per this table. May not be the minimum required to work in Mackyard per the union contract. But look at how at the very top here, the page number here is page number 14. That's going to be critical, because you're going to see how the evaluation of this test doesn't happen until page 23. And that is a tactic that I've seen used over and over and over again by the Transportation Safety Board in its reports. Time and distance, when you have that distance, are you going to remember what you read on page 14 when we do analysis further on of the qualifying test? Probably not. Why would that analysis not take place on page 15? As we go through this, ask yourself that question. But we're going to keep going, and you'll see what I mean. All right, so we just reviewed the test for the conductor who had been qualified, fake qualified, as I like to call it, when that person was involved in the Mackyard incident of 2007. Now, if you recall, the test itself in this report was explained on page 14, where he was required to explain, a lot of oral type parts to a test for a field test where you're supposed to be showing your knowledge. That was on page 14. But the adequacy of the conductor qualification test, the Transportation Safety Board does not get to that discussion until page 23. And again, by the time you're at page 23, are you going to remember what you read on page 14? Are you going to go back? Likely not. People don't go back and reread reports over and over again like I do when I do my analysis. and my dissection of a rail worker death investigation, which, you know, that death in 2013 brought up issues that dated all the way back to the Mackyard incident. And so there's a reason I went back to Mackyard and that incident. But anyways, and you'll see that as we keep going. But anyway, page 23 here. Why was this not on page 15 of this report? Because they want you to forget what you read on page 14. But anyways, let's look at this. In the block I have up here that I added in red, the Railway Safety Act, Section 20, okay? These would be violations of the Railway Safety Act, Section 20, if these changes to training programs were not first filed for review and approval by Transport Canada. Whenever there's changes to frontline training programs, the Railway Safety Act of Canada requires those be first given to Transport Canada for approval prior to field implementation. Now the regulation, Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, that section 19 and 19 only states that the changes just need to be filed with Transport Canada, as if that's all they need to do. Oh, no, 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 no. The Act overrides the regulation, and so they must first be filed and approved by Transport Canada prior to field implementation. Then when you implement, you must tell Transport Canada within 90 days that you've implemented those changes. But the law which overrides is the Railway Safety Act. So let's look at this section here in this report pertaining to the Mackyard incident on the adequacy of the conductor qualification testing. Okay, so to qualify increasing numbers of students without increasing training resources, compromises were made. Each and every one of those compromises would have been a change to the conductor training program. And as such, they would have had to be filed and reviewed and approved by Transport Canada prior to field implementation. So, violation of the Railway Safety Act, each and every one of those compromises. So if you don't have proper resources, proper time frames, whatever, proper training programs, any compromises could be considered a violation of Railway Safety Act Section 20. Now, it was left to the conductor trainees to learn the yard on their own. A yard with over 200 tracks, hundreds of switches. And when you're a conductor trainee, you're spending extremely long hours, extremely long shifts. You're lucky to have one day off a week. When are you going to be learning the yard on your own? You're not. You're just not, especially when this same report said that people who worked in that area said it could take 12 months to 18 months to become familiar with Mackyard. So to expect a trainee to learn the yard on their own, kind of unrealistic. So then it said, and opportunities for practical hands-on training were reduced. That would be a violation of the Railway Safety Act if that was not approved. Without consideration to course design. There were no resources dedicated to monitoring the quality of program graduates. In other words, it's okay if they're fake qualified. We just need an extra pair of hands helping out in the yard, right? Who cares if we're putting their lives potentially at risk because they're fake qualified and they don't have the experience they need to be working in that yard? Then it says, This matches the noted deficiencies identified in Transport Canada's review of CN operating practices. Note how we say these are noted deficiencies, not violations of the Railway Safety Act. You can be sure when it's an employee that may have done something wrong, violated just a rule, a Canadian rail operating rule. Oh, we're definitely going to point that out in our report. But you'll notice, never do they show in any Transportation Safety Board report, never do they explicitly state this is a violation of the Railway Safety Act Section 20. Excuse me, is that a deficiency in our Transportation Safety Board reports? You better believe it. And of course, this isn't one-sided, right? We'll only point out violations of specific rules or regulations if they're done by the employee, but not by management or by Transport Canada, right? Because we don't want to look bad. We don't want to look as though we're the ones violating the law, especially the Railway Safety Act. Because if CN has been allowed for so long to violate the Railway Safety Act, and Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board turned a blind eye to it by providing appropriate garbage investigation reports, as I like to call them, where we don't specify, this is a violation, this is a violation, this is a violation, this is a violation of the Railway Safety Act. And we don't hit them with fines, and we're not telling, by writing reports this way, not only are we lying to the public, we're lying to all rail investors too. Because your average rail investor may not be familiar with all those railway laws. And so if I'm not pointing out that these are a violation of the Railway Safety Act, is Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board, and Transport Canada has to sign off on these reports. And so is Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board not a party to financial fraud by making these companies and themselves look better than they are? Because don't forget, the Government of Canada also has debt instruments and financial instruments on the financial markets. And so we're going to make ourselves look better than we actually are too, when Transport Canada, in my opinion, has not done its job in decades. This is 2025. We're talking 18 years ago for the Mackyard incident, and clearly problems were there before that. So, and I suspect they may go back to 1995 when CN and CP became publicly traded companies. How many of these program changes were happening without prior approval, as the Railway Safety Act necessitated? That's my question. Let's go back all the way to 1995 and do those proper audits. Anyway, so then it says, conductor qualification testing did not meet the test of ecological validity because the methods, materials, and setting of the examination did not approximate real life work. So an oral test, I can be really brain heavy. I could get straight A's on a test. Does that mean that I know how to do the job? Absolutely not. And so the test was supposed to be for real life work. An oral test, when 50% of your test is an oral test, are you testing real life situations? Absolutely not. So that too could be considered a violation of the Railway Safety Act. You were supposed to be giving a field test, not an oral test. You could have gave that test in a classroom. This was supposed to be a field test. Then it says the training program as structured. That's really interesting. It was qualifying conductors without requisite skills. They structured it that way? Wait a minute. This training program was supposed to be on file with Transport Canada, as were supposed to be any changes to it. So for them to say in this Transportation Safety Board report, the training program as structured was qualifying conductors without the requisite skills or hands-on practical training to do the job. That, folks, means the training program was fake qualifying conductor trainees. That's what you could put in there in that sentence. The training program was fake qualifying conductor trainees. Not just this one. It looks like it was fake qualifying potentially all of them in Mackyard. That's just my opinion. You're free to form your own, but that's how I would read that. Then it says, they did not have adequate experience handling long, heavy train movements, nor did they know the intricacies of the territory in which they were required to operate, because they had no maps. As we saw in a previous training video, there were no maps in the manuals for Mackyard, not for the tracks, and not for the switches either. So, just operate, the blind leading the blind. And if, they were fake qualifying conductor trainees like this one, was the person qualifying him, if there was a conductor involved in the testing of this and the training of this employee, had they been fake qualified too? How far up the chain does the fake qualification go, and how far back? And could that explain why we have so much more of an exponentially dangerous environment in the rail industry? In my opinion, absolutely. Because oversight bodies like Transport Canada are not doing their jobs. In my opinion, they've become rail partners in crime, turning a blind eye to this. We're going to pretend these are not violations of the law. We're not going to label them as such in our reports. And again, Transport Canada signed off on reports like this. When the Transportation Safety Board does a report, just as we saw in the brainwashing series where I discussed all the lies in the accident report pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, that report had to be sent to the then Minister of Transportation at Transport Canada, Lisa Raitt, for her to sign off on it. And so these reports do get sent to Transport Canada for them to sign off. So Transport Canada can't say, well, that's a Transportation Safety Board report. We had nothing to do with it. Oh, you absolutely did have something to do with it. You signed off on it. And you could tell at Transport Canada that these were violations of the Railway Safety Act. Why did you not insist that they be specifically mentioned as violations of the Railway Safety Act, rather than do what this is and basically lie to rail families, rail workers, rail investors, rail customers, and on and on and on. And that's why I call these reports, quite frankly, a lot of them, garbage investigation reports paid for by taxpayers. And taxpayers should have huge issues with this, because misappropriation of public funds to garbage investigation reports like this, which really don't address the issues, because if you don't specify the issues, they don't get addressed. And I think that's clear from the fact that this has been going on for years. And just now is Transport Canada, under the new Minister of Transportation, Chrystia Freeland, now finally deciding to overhaul frontline rail worker training programs. Honey, you are only 2 decades too late. How many people have died in those 2 decades? In belt pack incidents and in other rail incidents, because Transport Canada did not do its job as a regulator. We're going to keep going here. So the theoretical exam tested knowledge, but not its practical application. Well, a theoretical exam, that's what you get in a classroom. Practical is a field test. This was supposed to be a field test, not a theoretical exam. It was supposed to be a field test where you're supposed to show that you have the proper skills to do the job before you get qualified. Then it said the testing was done in the daylight with no requirement to physically set up equipment or to plan and build a train. Okay, so when we looked on page 14 as to what was actually done, moving equipment, whatever, The testing was done in the daylight with no requirement to physically set up equipment or to plan and build a train. So, more theoretical knowledge, but zero practical experience is what this seems to be showing, and that's pretty nasty. Then it says the qualifying test to certify conductors in belt pack yard operations is not sufficiently rigorous to evaluate conductor trainee skills under work conditions. Okay, well, Table 1 says there was supposed to be a qualifying test on file with Transport Canada, right? But that test was not sufficient to evaluate the conductor trainee skills under the work conditions? Folks, the fact is, belt pack was never, in over 38 years, part of Appendix 14 for the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. Belt pack training was never included as a specific job training area or a specific job category, the way that conductor, hostler, locomotive engineer, and foreman were specific categories that required specific training. There was no inclusion of belt pack operator in the regulation pertaining to frontline rail worker training programs, and it's never been there in 38 years. So, Transport Canada can certainly say the qualifying test to certify conductors in belt pack yard operation is not sufficiently rigorous. Whose fault is that? They were never included in the regulation, not in 38 years. That regulation, SOR 87-150, came out in 1987. 38 years ago. After the Mackyard incident, they attempted to rewrite the regulation to include belt pack, but that was a complete and total public scam, as we're going to see as we keep going in the Mackyard incident series. And so what they attempted to do in the 2007-2009 timeframe is what I call a total public scam, and that's why now Minister Chrystia Freeland has it top of mind to finally overhaul frontline training program regulations to include belt pack and rail traffic controllers, who were also not included in that regulation in 38 years. So ask yourself, do you think that might explain why in this free-for-all environment that Transport Canada, when they knew there were deaths happening and accidents involving dangerous goods, and they still did nothing for 38 years? Like I said, folks, if it was me, if I was a rail investor, there's no way I'd be investing in the rail industry knowing what I know today. And Chrystia Freeland does not appear to want to include track maintenance workers in the new overhaul of frontline training programs in that new regulation. Why not? They're begging to be included. Why aren't you including them? So that they can have standardized training, which is part of the regulation. So keep a close eye on what's going to be coming down the line from Minister of Transportation, Chrystia Freeland, because in my opinion, when she was Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and the Minister of Finance, and she's known of these issues for more than 6 years, by not disclosing them to the public, honey, you are engaging, in my opinion, in financial fraud, making it look like Canada is so much more under rule of law than it really is, and making it look like former Crown corporations of the government of Canada, which are, of course, very close to the government of Canada, um, when you turn a blind eye to all these issues for decades and you become a rail partner in crime, in my humble opinion, I'm sorry, but Minister Freeland, in my opinion, you also belong in prison. That's just my opinion. You folks are free to form your own opinion as we keep going through these materials. In my opinion, there's a heck of a lot of people that belong in jail for criminal negligence, because there are people who have died because of these issues with not having proper belt pack training, not having proper oversight, not having proper compliance audits, and I mean ongoing compliance audits to make sure frontline rail workers are getting the training they're supposed to get. Transport Canada turned a blind eye to all of this for decades. So we're going to keep going. But that's why, training and testing is not rigorous enough, is because Transport Canada hasn't been doing its job for decades. Consequently, trainees without the requisite skill or experience are being placed in active service without any restrictions on their duties. And so you guys can go ahead, even though you're fake qualified, go ahead and move those dangerous goods and those rail cars that are full of chlorine gas and whatever, as this guy was doing. They're lucky those chlorine gas cars were not breached. Could have been outside of a major population center like Toronto. There's a lot of dangerous goods that move on these tracks, and you've got people who are fake qualified at the controls. And now, because Canada also did not prosecute rail executives who were involved in all of this, it has now infested the Class 1 rail carrier industry in the U.S. And when I say infested, I mean infested. Because, in my opinion, leopards do not change their spots. That's my opinion. All right, so again, the test itself that the conductor trainee took was described on page 14, but the adequacy of the test is not discussed until page 23 of the same report by the Transportation Safety Board. So, what exactly was the filler in between pages 14 and 23? And there's a reason I call it filler, because to me, page 23 and what is discussed there should absolutely have been on page 15. But let's look at what they do discuss after page 14. Well, we discuss simulator training in remote yard operations. But we admit that doesn't happen in the Canadian rail industry. For Class 1 rail carriers, it only happens in the U.S. and not at every U.S. operator either. That's provided on page 15. If it's not happening in Canada, why even discuss it? Until Transport Canada regulates that it needs to be happening, it's a non-issue. So again, report filler, right? We're just trying to put as many pages in between these relevant conversations as we can. Next, they discuss a Transportation Safety Board laboratory analysis, where they look at, distances and, you can read it. I'm not going to be covering that stuff. They're looking at the actual accidents and whatever. They're doing analysis based on engineering type stuff. Then the next thing they discuss on page 17 and 18 is other related yard accidents. Okay, well, you could have put that in a section later after you discussed the adequacy of the test. Why put that in the middle? You could have discussed that after you discussed the adequacy of the test. Then it was a Transport Canada review of CN operating practices. That's the audit we discussed in the previous Part 4 video on MacYard and the issues that surfaced in that audit. So that's provided on pages 18 and 19. Then there's the qualification standards and training for operating crews is discussed. That one, folks, is an amazing deception in this railway investigation report. It's provided on page 20. And we're going to be going through some of these things. Some of them I'm not going to be discussing in my Mackyard Incident series, simulator stuff when it's not even used in the Canadian rail industry. So some of these things I will be touching on in future Mackyard Incident videos, but not all of them. If they're not really relevant, if I feel that I don't need to discuss them, I'm going to skip over them. There's just too many issues I do need to discuss and put out there. But this one, point number 5, the way that this is discussed is a complete and total deception of the public, of rail families, of taxpayers, of rail investors, and so on. So we're definitely going to be discussing that one in future videos. Then there's the analysis, and the accident itself, where they discuss it in more details. That's provided on page 20 and 22. Then there's the handling of length and tonnage in yard switching and belt pack training and experience on page 22. Those are just very general statements. And then finally, we get to page 23 on the adequacy of the conductor qualifications testing. Again, why was this section not page 15 in this report? So it's just one of the tactics that they use, in my opinion, to totally deceive the public. But there's more, as we will see when we certainly discuss point number 5. Anyway, so that's all I want to tell you, and I want to just show you, the tactics that they use, and there's going to be a lot more of that being discussed. Boy, that point 5 is going to be a golden one. But anyways, we're going to keep going. All right, so this is going to end part 5 of the 2007 Mackyard incident, and I consider the information in this one to be just golden. But as we move forward in this series, you'll see that there are other golden things to be revealed, for sure. And so on that note, have a great day, and I will see you in part 6.